afternoon's academic conversations. Dr. Teuku Reza Fadeli is a historian and lecturer at the Department of History, Universitas, Indonesia. He holds a PhD in history from the University of York. As a visiting fellow at KITLV, he is conducting research for his project Wheels of Empire, Bicycles, Race, and Social Mobility in Colonial and Post-Colonial Indonesia. His study examines how cycling shaped everyday life, social mobility, and racial hierarchy from the late 19th century to the post independent period, tracing how a global technology was redefined through local structures of power and aspiration. Drawing on primary materials held in the KITLB and Leiden University collections, the project situates Indonesia within the wider global history of mobility and empire. It also forms part of the ETH Zurich initiative, Two Wheels, One World, Global Perspectives on the History of the Bicycle and of Cycling, which explores the history from the global south perspectives. Through his work, Reja seeks to connect histories of technology and urban modernity to broader debates on colonial legacies and post-colonial social change in Southeast Asia. He is the author of Nuclear Sukarno, Kaijan Awal Politik Tenaga, Aton Indonesia, 1958 to 1967, Tangerang, Margin, Kiri, 2021. His writings have also appeared in Whiteboard Journal, In the Progress, the Jakarta Post, and the Jakarta Globe. Let us all welcome, and we are very privileged and honored to have here with us this afternoon, Dr. Teuku Reza Fadeli.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Shirley Padua. I'm very honored to be here with everyone, and please call me Reza. And yes, and I'm very happy to be here. And thank you for the kind introduction. So I suppose Lulu can talk a bit more about the session, I think.
Sorry. Yeah, so we were talking about this for almost a year. So the main objective of this online talk is to actually to be able to share academic conversation, because I believe the School of Arts and Sciences should be the institution of knowledge production. So we initially started this online talk with a dear friend of mine from New Zealand, where we talk about indigenous communities in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And then followed by another wonderful conversation with a fellow Sambuangueño. So Zamboanga is a southern part of the Philippines in Mindanao, where she talked about sex workers in Southeast Asia in the name of Dr. Sharmila Parmanan from London School of Economics, is a fellow Sambuangueño. And then we move forward in discussing social media and marketing in the context of the Philippines and China. So I'm glad that I'll be able to have with us one of the emerging scholars and one of rising historian from Indonesia, because I was asking some of the Indonesian students that we have in PW, like, do you know Dr. Reza? And then they said, yeah, we love to watch his talk because he's actually widely known in Indonesia. So we're lucky to be able to have him with us and share his research and talk about something that he is interested with. So yeah, to officially start, may we have Dr. Teuku Fadeli. Just like they say it in Filipino, maraming salamat to Dr. Rasha and to our Indonesian friends and Filipino friends coming over.
Salamat. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lulu. Yes, I guess I can share my screen. One sec. Right. Can everyone see the screen I'm sharing? Yes, perfect. Thank you. So, yes. Sorry. Yes. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the School of Arts and Science at the Philippines Women's University, and especially to Assistant Professor Lulu. We met in Chiang Mai last year at a workshop on decolonization of Southeast Asia. It's great to see you again in different settings. And Lulu invites me to, and he organized this session, and it's very meaningful to present my work, which is not about bicycle, not about the mobility, but different kind of urban modernity that happened in the interwar before the Second World War period in the 1930s to early 1940s. And well, again, it's very meaningful for me to present the work here at the university, at the Philippines Women's University, with, I think, with long institutional commitment to women's higher education and public intellectual life. And that history resonates strongly with today's theme, because I will discuss how modern womanhood circulated through popular media in the late colonial Southeast Asia, particularly in the Malay world in colonial Indonesia or Dutch East Indies, the British Malaya, including Singapore and Penang. So today, I will focus on a very specific case of study, which is the 1937 Malay language film, Terang Bulan, or translated Full Moon or Bright Moon in some archive, and its leading actress, Rukia. And the film released in the Dutch East Indies or colonial Indonesia, which corresponds to present-day Indonesia, and it quickly traveled to British Malaya, including Singapore and Penang. And within months, its songs, the images, the publicity images, and star persona circulated across colonial jurisdiction. So this talk is it draws from an article, a forthcoming article in a journal of Indonesia and the Malay world, which developed from my doctoral research that I finished 2 years ago. And I examined how this film, Terang Bulan and Rukia, participated in a transcolonial media formation that linked the Dutch East Indies and the British Malaya through cinema, through radio broadcasting, vernacular newspapers, and also consumer markets. So the analytical questions guiding my talk today concern circulations is how did the film acquire recognition beyond the metropole city of Batavia, and how did its song circulate through radio before or alongside the theatrical release, and how did the actress image become legible to audience across different colonial administration, different colonial societies, and how did these processes contribute to the formation of modern womanhood as a publicly recognizable cultural figure. So my central argument, my central claim is that popular culture in the 1930s operated within a dense media ecology, and cinema interacted with radio broadcasts that circulated vernacular musical traditions such as keroncong, which I will talk a bit more later on, the newspaper that printed theater listing and reviews, performance tradition that shaped audience expectation, and advertising practices that incorporate film titles into commodity promotions. So these everyday interactions and repetitions across these media channels generate familiarity across port cities, including Batavia, Singapore, and Penang, in even Manila somehow in the 1930s to early 1940s. And Rukia, the actress Stardom, emerged within these infrastructures. The producers, editors, photographers, theater owners shape her public image through interviews, through portraits, through publicity, copy. And her persona combined cinematic glamour with recognizable form of feminine respectability. That structured presentation enabled her image to circulate across Southeast Asia, especially in the Malay world, without losing intelligibility. So when I speak about cinema, stardom, and modern womanhood, I kind of examine how a specific film and a specific actress illuminate a broader regional process. Late colonial Southeast Asia generated shared cultural reference through colonial infrastructure, print circulation, and commercial coordination uh, in the region. So women on screen and in print played a central role in making modernity visible, audible, and socially meaningful. So that is the discussion I would like to begin today. So so I frame the late 1930s Malay world as a media field structured by circulations. Batavia, Singapore, and Penang, they form nodes uh, of network within maritime network that connected print culture, sound culture, musical culture, performance, and commerce. The steamship routes, distribution change, and multilingual readership of circulated newspaper at that time sustained this field. And cinema operated within this interconnected environment. So producers of numerous films coordinated film releases with radio broadcasts that circulated songs, newspaper published previews, reviews, and theater listing in advertisement, etc. And touring performance reinforce familiarity with musical styles and narrative conventions. And it also supported by advertisements across the media. And these media channels reinforce one another and generated cumulative exposure. And a repetition across the circuit produced recognition. An audience encountered the same melody in a radio program, the same title in a newspaper column, the same actress in a studio, and the same reference in an advertisement. So through repeated exposure, entertainment became intelligible across colonial jurisdictions. So recognition traveled through infrastructure rather than through political integration. So this is something beyond political and colonial control. And Stardom, the actress itself, emerged from a, a deliberate image construction itself. So the individuals that involved in the production, the producers, editors, and the distribution itself, they define the image of the actress as modern while situating her with an established norm of femininity. And this structured presentation enabled her, Rukia in this case, because audience could situate the star within familiar moral framework, and I approach taste in this sense as embodied cultural practices. So audience listen to songs, they attended screenings, they watch films, they discuss performers, and they purchase goods associated with cinematic narratives. And through this act, they participated in a shared cultural field, or a new kind of a new kind of participation in cultural sphere. And modernity acquired texture through repeated practices that embedded in everyday life. And this framework allows us to analyze a single film and a single actress as entry points into a broader transcolonial media formation. So I'm a historian by training. I did my bachelor to my PhD in history, and I'm very much determined by this historical approach in looking at sources and methodology. So the basis of this study, I work primarily with vernacular newspapers published in Batavia, in Singapore, and several towns in British Malaya, including Penang, um, and also in Kuala Lumpur. And these papers carried film listings, short reviews, advertisements, studio announcements, press release, even gossip columns, and reports of theater attendance. So they provide chronological markers that allows us to track the timing of screenings and the spread of publicity. I also draw on film magazines and studio publicity materials, and these sources construct star images through portrait photography in or outside the studio, interviews, and narrative framing. And they reveal how producers and editors position performers within contemporary expectations of gender and respectability. And radio broadcast schedules form another key sources. So radio program, the document also show the particular songs that associated with a film and when they enter the public soundscape, and they allow us to establish the sequence through which audience encounter a melody before or alongside the film's theatrical release. And what also I found interesting is the multilingual advertisements that extend this picture. I will show you one of the advertisement later on. And the promotional materials appeared in Malay, in Dutch, in English, and in Bahasa Indonesia as well, the modern kind of form of Malay language. So these all are my sources, and I think for the advertisement, it very depended on the intended readership. So the audience who can speak Dutch or who can speak English or who can speak Malay, or can read Jawi, the Arabic letter of Malay, shows that the shift in language, imagine their audience in the advertisement, imagine their audience and how they tailor public address across colonial settings. So I treat these materials as archival traces of circulations, and by assembling these fragments chronologically and geographically, I reconstruct the pathways through which a film and its star acquired regional visibility. And this method foregrounds infrastructure and mediation as historical processes. So two of the biggest radio broadcasting company in the Dutch East Indies or the colonial Indonesia and the British Malaya are Nirom, or in English is the Netherlands Indies Broadcasting Company, and also the BMBC, the British Malaya Broadcasting Corporation. So in late November 1937, a Malay language newspaper published in Batavia, which is now Jakarta, um, uh, they printed a radio schedule announcing the broadcast of a keroncong melody associated with an upcoming film. Keroncong was a popular urban musical genre at that time and widely recognized in port cities across the region. The film itself had not yet premiered in theaters, and audience had not seen the actors or the narrative. What what circulated first was the song, and 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 to understand the significance of this, we need to situate ourselves geographically. So the Dutch East Indies, or I would say just colonial Indonesia and colonial Malaya, were separate colonial territories governed by different European empires. Um, but the port cities such as Batavia, Singapore, and Penang, they were connected through maritime trade, connected through migration, print circulations, and also radio transmission. And um, Malay language function as a widely understood lingua franca across these spaces. And radio broadcasting in the 1930s created a shared oral environment that extended beyond municipal boundaries. So a melody, for example, that aired in Batavia could resonate with listeners who encounter similar musical style in Singapore or Penang, or even in Bangkok or Saigon, for example. So, and even when transmission did not physically cross borders, musical forms and repertoire circulated through touring performers, gramophone records. The gramophone industry was very huge at that time and also very determinant in this distribution, but also the print publicity. So this brief radio listing in the newspaper at that time, it marks an early moment in the life of the film itself. And the song entered domestic interiors, they entered coffee shops, they entered public gathering spaces before audience purchase a cinema ticket. And the sound established familiarity itself, and they create expectation. It anchored the film within a recognizable musical culture. So through this sequence, we can observe how modern entertainment entered everyday life through listening practices embedded in urban colonial society. And sound prepare the audience before they enter the cinema. And the radio listing shows that people already knew the melody, associated it with the film, and anticipated its release. So by the time they saw the image on the screen, the film had already entered public life through listening. Just a bit of settings of this all happened. So as you can see, Batavia is on the northwest part of Java, and Singapore is on the southern tip of the peninsular Malaya. Penang is another big city, port city at the top of the British Malaya, at the northern part of the British Malaya, close to the Straits of Malacca. And so these cities, according to many historians such as Sulin Lewis or Mark Frost, they were interconnected port cities. And to understand how this film circulated, we need to situate it within the maritime networks of Southeast Asia in the early 20th century. So Batavia in the Dutch East Indies, which is today, I already mentioned, is Jakarta, and Singapore and Penang in British Malaya operated as major port cities connected by regular steamship routes. And these routes transported newspapers, they transport printed advertisements, gramophone records, etc. So a film produced in Batavia could reach Singapore quickly. and its publicity materials often travel with it. So historians such as Sulin Lewis and Mark Frost have shown that these port cities sustain interconnected intellectual and cultural environments. And Lewis demonstrate urban publics in Southeast Asian port cities. Her studies, including in Rangoon, in Myanmar, and also in Bangkok and Penang, um, um, demonstrate that these port cities develop shared cultural references through print and associational life. And Frost, on the other hand, highlights how transnational print networks and commercial infrastructures link colonial cities across imperial boundaries. And their work helped me to conceptualize the region as a connected urban field shaped by circulation. So when studying Southeast Asia, I'm trying to look at this region as a connected uh, region instead of doing comparatively. So I could pursue what I would call a connective comparative approach in looking or studying these regions. And in the Malay world, I would say including in nowadays Brunei and also some part of Philippines, some part of Thailand, also Malay function as an urban lingua franca within this field. And newspapers such as uh, Pemandangan, which is translated spectacle or view in Batavia, published in Malay for a wide readership. Film dialogues and song lyrics relied on the same register. Advertisement used Malay to reach audiences across Dutch and British territories. So this linguistic continuity facilitated regional address. And the archival records documents how commercial actors coordinated circulations. So again, in November 1937, the newspaper Pemandangan printed radio schedules announcing songs from the film Terang Bulan. And in December, a month later, in 1937, the Malaya Tribune in Singapore, one of the biggest newspaper in terms of the readership and the circulation in Singapore, advertised the film as the Great Malay Musical. The theater in Batavia, the Rex Theater, featured the actress Rukia prominently in its publicity. So, and then later, 2 years later, in the 1939, a Penang advertisement promoted a kebaya, a kind of a dress, vernacular dress, and the name of the dress they advertised drawing directly on the film's title. And these examples demonstrate how distributors, editors, theater owners, advertisers coordinated publicity, and the film accumulated recognition across successive urban markets in the Malay world. So, and to analyze Terang Bulan and Rukiah Stardom, I draw on Miriam Bratu Hansen's concept of vernacular modernism. So Miriam Hansen, a renowned film scholar in America, developed this idea through her study of the early 20th century cinema, especially classical Hollywood film. And she argues that cinema shaped how mass audience experience modernity. And film organized perception, and it structured how viewers understood time, how they understood movement, intimacy, gender relations, and also urban life. So through recurring narrative convention and star images, cinema provides shared emotional and visual framework for living in a rapidly changing society. And Miriam Hansen used the term vernacular modernism to describe this process. So modernity entered everyday life through popular media rather than through elite artistic movements alone. And cinema new social realities. For example, industrializations, urban growth, shifting gender roles, etc., into recognizable stories, gesture, and face, individuals, moral character, etc., and so on. And an audience learn how to see and feel through this repeated cinematic forms. And these frameworks helps us to situate Terang Bulan, the film, in 1937. The port cities such as Batavia, Singapore, and Penang, they experience rapid commercial expansion, new media technologies, and increased mobility, uh, big mobilities or small mobilities such as bicycles. And urban residents encounter radio broadcasting, gramophone recordings, illustrated newspapers, and cinema halls within a single generation. So film entered an already dynamic media environment. But I will say that traditional um, artistic performance already predates the arrival of cinema, what we call a modern cinema in Southeast Asia, in Malay world before this. We will talk about it later. But in this sense, Terang Bulan, the film itself, function as vernacular modernism in practice. And the film organized perception through song, through gesture, through costume, through narrative pacing, and the actress itself, Rukia, her image provide a concrete figure through which urban audiences engage ideas of romance, aspiration, and respectability. So in this sense, modernity acquired recognizable form through these mediated encounters. So applying Miriam Hansen's framework to maritime Southeast Asia allows us to see how cinema structured everyday cultural experience across colonial jurisdiction. And the film itself, Terang Bulan and Rukia, participated in a regional media process that shaped how audience perceived gender, emotion, and urban life in the late 1930s. So let's crack on to the case study. So, so the core case study, the main case study of my talk today is the 1937 Malay language film Terang Bulan and its leading actress Rukia. I should clarify a basic methodological constraint from the start. So Terang Bulan is a lost film. So I never watched the film myself. I cannot watch it today unless there's a collection somewhere that private collection somewhere that I can access. But no, I haven't watched the film, and my analysis therefore relies on contemporaneous sources that documented the film as an event, newspaper reports, theater advertisements, film magazine, etc. So I treat these sources as evidence of how audience encountered the film through anticipation, promotion, and repeated reference. And this approach shifts the center of gravity of the analysis. I track circulation and recognition. I ask how the film traveled across the cities through cinema exhibition, etc. And and the archive is unusually dense for this case. It gives us multiple entry points into the film's regional life. So I have Malay language newspapers in Batavia that reported early excitement and printed related schedules. We have English language newspaper in Singapore that promoted as a major urban instruction. I also have later coverage that follows Rukia public receptions and keeps the film memory active. And these traces allow me to reconstruct the film as a regional phenomenon sustained by media repetition across colonial jurisdiction. So, what kind of film was Terang Bulan? So, So contemporary newspaper and film magazines identified it as a Malay language musical romance. Uh, the Batavia magazine in November 37 described it as the I quoted in Dutch, de eerste Indische muzikale film, or the first Indies musical film, and featured Rukia portrait on its cover. The November issue of another film magazine, Film Review, carried a full poster and promotional copy that foregrounded spectacle, music, and romance. So reviews and publicity consistently emphasized its song, emotional narrative, and romantic appeal. The film drew directly from established stage tradition, so especially Bangsawan theater, which had circulated across the Malay world since the late 19th century. So Bangsawan is a kind of traditional art performance. It was operated as a commercial urban center, urban theater stages in proscenium venues, organized around star performers and promoted through newspaper advertising. So it combined melodrama, romance, song, scenic display, and kind of moral resolutions within a repertory that traveled between this region. And regular advertising and touring schedules integrated Bangsawan into everyday urban entertainment culture. Another kind of traditional uh, art performance is Comedy Istanbul, in the Dutch East Indies, in Colonial Indonesia, which developed along similar lines. So touring, they did tour, and touring companies staged Malay language musical dramas for mixed urban audience and relied on press publicity and circulating songs to sustain recognition. These theatrical forms train audience to expect recurring plots, recognizable character types, musical interludes, and also star-centered appeal. And by the 1930s, the audience were already familiar with this, and they were accustomed to this kind of conventions. And the film itself, Terang Bulan, it transferred these convention into sound cinema or talkies. It is also known as talkies, the film with dialogues with sound instead of silent film that also appear in the previous decades. So the detailed synopsis presents a narrative structure to similar with the along the lines with the traditional theaters itself, and the synopsis highlight musical exchange between the protagonists as a key narrative device. They're reinforcing the centrality of song within the storyline. So so this is why the music is uh, very crucial and function as the film's primary public identifier. The contemporary newspaper ran an article titled Keroncong Musik in Terang Bulan on October 1957, it foregrounding the songs before the general exhibition. And as what I already mentioned before, that the melody circulated independently through broadcast media and it predates the release of the film itself. And these sources document the film like of aural and sonic presence in advance or alongside cinema screenings. So publicity materials reinforce this musical framing, and film review promoted the production as the superproduksi or super production and highlight its musical qualities. The film aligned closely with the conventions of, as I already mentioned, vernacular musical theater, and it integrate established narrative structure, musical performance, and advertising materials that documents all of these evidence quite clearly. So what I need to emphasize is the film entered urban entertainment circuits as a cinematic extension of performance traditions that already embedded in Malay-speaking port cities culture. So, but how do we understand how the film circulated um, across the region? So we need to look at the media infrastructure of the late 1930s. So I think I already mentioned some of these, but the radio that enter the public or domestic spaces, and the newspaper that um, give intended audience a familiarity of the script of the film, and also the language played a practical role in the circulation, and the register could be and in this sense the language itself uh, it's very important that play a practical role in this kind of circulation. So in colonial Indonesia, the register could be described as Bahasa Indonesia, but in British Malaya, the same register was labeled Malay. So editors use the term appropriate to their readership, and the linguistic form remained mutually intelligible. So this kind of flexibility supported circulations across colonial administrations. And the third is cinema circuits. So in British Malaya, the film exhibition operated through commercial networks that link venues such as for example, the Alhambra Theater, the Ritz in Singapore, to distributions by networks of cinema entrepreneurs that extending from Penang to Kuala Lumpur to Johor or other parts of the regions. And the Malaya Tribune, another newspaper, advertised Terang Bulan on the Ritz, for example, months after its initial release. And the continued screenings show that the film moved within a coordinated commercial system. And and uh, and also it's important to highlight the associational culture. So in 1938, in August 1938, the Malaya Tribune reported Rukia reception in Geylang, a district in Singapore, where community organization hosted her as a public figure with drinks and dinner, etc. And screen celebrity entered neighborhood spaces, I would say, and civic events, and it reinforcing recognition beyond the cinema hall. And all of these elements form a connected media environment. So Terang Bulan, the film circulated within this intermediate infrastructure across the Dutch and the British colonial port cities. So in Batavia, the Malay language newspaper Pemandangan described extraordinary public attention at the Rex Theater in December 1937, and the report noted full balconies, standing spectators, and 4 consecutive sold-out nights. And these details indicate strong attendance at the initial run. In Singapore, the film screened in the Alhambra Theater in December 1937, and also at the Ritz, which shows the huge demand within the same city months after the premiere, after the release of the film. And by 1938, as I already mentioned, there was a star reception and civic honor in Geylang in Singapore. There's a public ceremonies followed the film screening. They celebrate some kind of after party events after the screening. So these reports show um, some kind of continuity of visibility and audience investment over the time. So let's talk a bit more about Rukia. Rukia, she was a keroncong singer before he rose into an actress in cinema. So Rukia appearance in the film Terang Bulan changed her position in the entertainment world. She moved from vernacular toneel theater. Toneel uh, is a Dutch slang. It's a Dutch word for theater. So she moved from that into a new form of celebrity shaped by film magazines, etc., and cross-colonial publicity, etc. So we can see this kind of shift clearly in the Dutch newspaper that circulated in Indonesia in 1937. The cover presents her in a composed studio portrait and name her directly as Rukia, the Malay film star. So inside the report, the synopsis links her performance to the ambition of what it calls the first indies or in Indonesian musical films. In that single issue, she appears as both a continuation of stage culture and as part of a new cinematic environment. And on screen, she plays Rohaya, a kampong or a compound maiden whose love is tested by separation and coercion. And another colonial sponsored newspaper, Panji Pustaka, described the central romantic moment as a duet. So another character in the film, Kasim, or in one of the in one of the scene, sings praise, and Rohaya answer with sorrow and states that she remains under her paternal familial father's authority. And so the film itself shows some kind of a romantic feeling expressed through songs, and the language of obedience remains in place, and emotion becomes public and hierarchy remains visible. So throughout the story, Rohaya endures, and she remains loyal and restrained. And historians Christopher Woodridge discussion of Rukia early typecasting as a village heroine helps explain this pattern. So her virtue is confirmed through patience. Her longing is voiced through keroncong music. So when her portrait appears in the Malaya Tribune in 1938 and later in women's magazine Istri Indonesia in 1941, the same configuration is repeated. So what I would like to emphasize is that her persona travels through reproduction and attributions. So when I describe Rukia as a model of modern Malay womanhood, I mean that all of these combinations. So she can express romanticism through songs. Also, she shows visible participation in public or cinema culture, and also clear alignment with modesty and domestic virtue. So her image integrates sound film, studio, photography, vernacular newspaper, and regional circulations. And it offered audience a way to imagine, to visualize a modern femininity within a Malay cultural framework shaped by media and commerce and mobility as well. The image here is it's one of the scene in the film Rohaya, played by Rukia, and also Kasim, played by Dullah. I will talk about the actors later on. But what I also want to discuss is that the circulation of Terang Bulan itself, it extended beyond the cinema and extended into fashion. And in 1939, Penang magazine, Penang Shopping Corner, and they put an advertisement from Modern Kebaya Tailoring company in Penang. They place an advertisement in the Malay in the magazine. They promoting a garment called Terang Bulan Kebaya, and the advertisement described is as the I will I will read this Jawi translation is the permaisuri of kebaya, permaisuri kepada kebaya-kebaya, or queen of kabayas. And the film title appears directly as the name of the garment. And the company name was printed in Roman letter in Jawi Malay script in Arabic. So the advertisement addressed a multilingual urban readership in British Malaya. And the linguistic format reflects the wider media environment in which the film circulated. Malay titles, Roman script in the East Indies press, and also English glosses in Singapore. And the garment's branding relied on public familiarity with the film and its songs. So by 1939, the title Terang Bulan already carried cultural recognition across the Malay world. And the tailor incorporated that recognition into the fashion market. So women purchasing the kebaya aligned themselves with a cultural phenomenon that originated in Batavia and traveled through newspaper, radio broadcasts, and theatrical screenings. The advertisement also fits into the broader history of the kebaya in the late 19th and early 20th century. By the 1920s and the 1930s, the kebaya had become a hybrid fashion form. It combined European lace, Indo-Dutch tailoring, peranakan embroidery, or mestizo, and Malay and Japanese elements. So its meaning shifted across different settings. So fashion advertising in Penang during the 1930s often used terms such as new fashion or fashion baru, and info cosmopolitan centers like Singapore to signal prestige. And the Terang Bulan advertisement follows this kind of commercial language and adds a cinematic reference point. Newspapers such as the Morning Tribune in Singapore had promoted the film as the Great Malay Musical, and the Kebaya advertisement used similar superlative languages. And the vocabulary of elevation circulates between cinema and commodity itself. So the Kebaya carried the name of the film, and the fashion absorbed cinematic recognition and translate it into a visible sign of urban, modern public life. So let me end by clarifying what this perspective allows us to see. So Terang Bulan has often been treated as an early milestone in Indonesian film history. When we follow its circulation across Batavia, Singapore, and Penang, a different picture comes into focus. And the film operated within a regional media environment that connected the Dutch East Indies and the British Malaya through shared languages, shipping routes, print networks, and commercial entertainment. So the archive makes this visible through small format materials, radio schedules, short newspaper advertisements, press interviews, studio portraits, and retail notices document how recognition was built and also sustained. And these items show how anticipation formed before release, and how music traveled independently, and how attribution in print reinforced visibility across cities. And also with the Kabaya advertisement that extend this process into material culture. So a film title moved into the clothing market and also fashion market incorporated cinematic recognition. And gender sits at the center of the circulations. Rukia public image, her song performance, her kabaya-clad portraits, her press representation as a married woman, structure how modern Malay femininity was imagined across media platforms. Her persona provided a model that integrates sound cinema, celebrity photography, vernacular print, and fashion. So this case demonstrate that modernity in the late colonial Malay world took shape through circulation, through mediation and repetition. So it moved through infrastructure, through language, and through everyday practices such as listening, reading, attending screenings, and also shopping, purchasing clothing, purchasing clothes. So by tracing this movement, we can see how a film became part of a shared cultural formation that crossed imperial boundaries and shaped ideas of gender, of taste, and modern life in colonial Southeast Asia. So let me close by returning to the larger picture. So in the late 1930s, modern life in the Malay world took shape to interconnected media infrastructures. The sites of these interactions were cinema halls, radio stations, vernacular newspapers, etc., and also shopping places. And Terang Bulan allows us to trace this process with unusual clarity. Its songs travel through radio before screenings, its synopsis shape anticipation in print, its star appear in studio portraits and newspaper features across colonial jurisdiction. Uh, and then it's later entered the fashion industries as well. So Rukia public image give the circulation a gender kind of form through song, etc. And she embodied a version of modern Malay womanhood that integrated cinematic modernity with recognizable moral codes, and her image became legible across diverse Malay-speaking audiences. And taste in this context was enacted in everyday practices like listening, reading, attending, purchasing, etc. So, although my case centers on the Malay world, similar processes unfolded elsewhere in Southeast Asia. Um, in the Philippines, for example, film, radio, and print also shaped new forms of womanhood and celebrity in the interwar period. And urban publics in Manila, for example, encounter their own version of mediated femininity through popular cinema and illustrated magazines. And placing these cases side by side would allow us to think more broadly about how popular culture structured modern experience across Southeast Asia. And the case of the film, Terang Bulan, shows that popular entertainment did not remain confined within imperial borders. It moved beyond the jurisdiction through language, through commerce, and everyday consumption. In doing so, it contributed a shared modern experience in the region on the eve of the Second World War or the decolonization. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Reza, Dr. Reza, for sharing that wonderful discussion. Because I believe that's actually fascinating how film in the past actually able to shape not just the culture but also the identity, especially when we try to look at the Southeast Asia. For example, in the context of the Philippines, film culture is a bit diverse because while we have in the Philippines, like in Manila area, where Tagalog old films were actually dominated, in the southern part of the Philippines, we also have Bollywood that's actually dominating in the film culture among Filipinos. So that's actually how diverse or diversified the proliferation of this film culture across Southeast Asia. So, to formally add to this academic discussion, we invited two reactors from our institution. But let me share the screen that I was not able to share a while ago. Okay. So I hope you can see my screen. Yeah, I wasn't able to share it a while ago. So yeah. So we started with Dr. Teuku Fadeli as our speaker. Now we'll be proceeding with our two reactors this afternoon. So allow me to introduce our first reactor from my department, School of Arts and Sciences. We have a faculty member in the Department of Communication, the School of Arts and Sciences at the Philippine Women's University, Manila. His research interests are in sports communication and the sociology of sports with a focus on football. And he has published several articles on football in the Philippines with a focus on transnationalism and athlete migration. Dr. Rehal is a member of the International Sociology of Sports Association, or ISA, International Sociological Association, ISA, and International Association for Communication and Sports. So we have a good friend of mine and a colleague and a mentor, Dr. Rehal, Satwinder Rehal. The next reactor that we have is a faculty from School of Music, Filipino ethnomusicologist, musician, and educator affiliated in Philippine Women's University School of Music, where he serves as a assistant professor specializing in music education, cultural heritage, and the anthropology of music, with the research focusing on the pedagogy curriculum development and the Aitam Magbukon's traditional vocal genres. He's also a board member of the Koday Society of the Philippines and has led workshops for the national music competitions for the young artists in the Philippines. Represented the Philippines internationally, engaged in artistic research initiatives, and authored reflective and commemorative scholarly works. Allow me to welcome our next reactor, Amiel Kim Juan Capitan. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Hi, Reza. Good afternoon, wherever you are. So, Reza, salam. Um, Very intriguing presentation. Loved it. I could relate very well with it because I grew up watching Bollywood. So, I do remember the stories of my late dad. He had a collection of film magazines from way in the 30s. And what you described is exactly when you touched on fashion. Um, the Indian movie industry was mostly influenced by its diasporic community around the world. And with colonization, we have the history of the indentured laborers who are sent around the world in the British colonies. So film also followed suit, especially with the establishment of the film industry in India. So there are a lot of similarities I note when you're using the vernacular modernity concept as borrowed from Miriam Hansen. And I think critically is that modernity is not a single concept in this case, that there are various diverse modernities as exhibited in your case example, and also other examples, if I note from Bollywood, or as we know that time, Indian film, before it became corrupted to be termed Bollywood. But I mean, what we see is a heterogeneity of representation in this circular economy, be it the film's commodification, fashion, but also infused with local cultural nuances. as you've exhibited with music, with language, local theatrical exhibitions. What I take prominence from your presentation and the general issue about films is the use of technology. The use of technology in everyday life. I see an appropriation of Western technology used for local purposes where they're able to propagate their own narratives, storylines, and of course, cultural exhibitions that is relatable within this circulatory mode, as you showed with the case study of Rukia. Rukia's story sounds very familiar. I relate that very well with a famous Indian actress called Nargis, in full Fatima Rashid, who was an Indian icon actress of the late 40s and 50s. She blended traditional Indian virtues with progressive Western modernity. This is through her different roles, where on one hand she would exhibit this urban suave female, and at the same time would be also portrayed in other movies as the resilient rural-based matron that was showing a balance between Western modernity and local Indian culture values that is rooted in their own context. So Nargis and Rukia's stories sound very familiar. And for cases in Africa, where I come from, in Kenya, and the general East Africa region, because I have relatives from my mom's from Tanzania and I have aunties in Uganda. Fashion was a very critical point on how they would purchase their clothing, their hairstyles, their eyeshadow makeups, vis-a-vis these actresses that they used to watch or see in magazines. What I would actually ask is if you looked at the case of movie posters. I know you mentioned adverts, but movie posters played a critical role also to portray some sense of femininity or even masculinity in that case within the circulation that happened pre-independence time and also immediately after independence. What is also fascinating is that the characters in India also went beyond just where the Indian diaspora was. Notable markets included Russia or the Soviet Union. So even in I would say in Western spheres, this movie circulated. And what was interesting with Bollywood is that it was politically aligned. Uh, the the popularity of Indian movies in Russia during the time of the Soviets um, aligned with a shared socialist ideology between the two countries and their anti-US stances, but also came at a time when um, Russia or the Soviet Union at that time did not have much diversity in the kind of films that they had. So with the introduction of Indian films, they found a variety of entertainment that they related with apart from the storyline. So beyond the Malacca area that you looked at, did this circulation go outside the region is something that I would like to ask from you in an otherwise excellent presentation. And of course, considering Mariam Hansen's definition that you took on as your framework. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Reham. So let's have now from School of Music, we have Assistant Professor Amiel Kim Kapita.
Good afternoon, Reza. Terima kasih for a very wonderful presentation. Sangat bagus. I'm very interested on the role of Karongchong um, in the in the advertisement of um, in the advertisement of these movies. You mentioned in your presentation that the music and the sound or the OSTs of these movies came first. So I was wondering what particular kerongchong was that was used in this um, particular film, and how do people actually relate to this actually relate to this to the music when they watch the movie. I'm kind of interested with that. In parallel with the Philippines, because Kerongchong is also like a hybrid form, right? It mixes with Portuguese things and so on, and it uses a mandolin kind of instrument. It uses a mandolin kind of instrument, which, in parallel with the Philippines, the movies during this time are accompanied, or the movies during this time in the Philippines are all, most of the music are kundiman, which is also like a hybrid form of music, which is influenced by both American, Spanish, and Filipino sensibilities in the music. What is interesting is the kundiman is also sometimes played in this what's this kind of instrument, which is also used in Kerongchong. So it's good that you trace all of this what's this influences and this similarities, this cultural flows of not just music but also material culture in music in this particular region. And I'm also interested on and now I'm interested because in ethnomusicology there's very scarce study in the ethnomusicology of the Philippines. There's very scarce study on the music on this particular period of time, because most of the ethnomusicologists in the Philippines study the indigenous one, but in this interwar era there's not much studies on this. So now I become interested on what is the music, or what is the music in these movies, in these movies during this time of what's this in this time of the if history. And then what else? Yeah, probably I will I want to ask, or I want you to tell s- more about what's this the how does this music, how does this keroncong, um what what's this how is this keroncong also crucial in portraying women, because I don't know, with the lyrics or with the music, how does this become crucial in the formation or the construction of womanhood in complementary or supplementary with these movies. But otherwise, I so love your presentation. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Assistant Professor Amiel Kim Kapitan, for that detailed reaction from the presentation of Dr. Reza. So anyway, just to give a brief description, I was actually a bit fascinated with how it was discussed, especially in the context of Southeast Asia, where there are a lot of influences when you talk about the film cinema that we have. We have the Bollywood dancing features. We also have the influence of the Mexican telenovelas. Then are getting a new perspective coming from the presentation of Dr. Reza on how a certain representation of film was actually being promoted or being featured or represented in the context of the Malay world. Yeah, my apologies for my cam. So yeah. So I feel like a lot of influences are the things that we actually needed to consider, because we might not be seeing the other factors or other elements of how a certain film or film industry that we have in the contemporary context are being shaped across, not just across Southeast Asia, but across Asia. So moving forward, so I think we have reached the point where we could have a question and answer portion. where we will ask some of our audience to ask questions, or maybe from our reactors to actually
Perhaps, uh,
yeah.
sorry, perhaps I can give a quick response to
Oh yeah, sure.
Professor Rehal and Professor Kim as well. I'm actually very grateful for the comments, and first from Professor Rehal, your comments raised several important points, and yeah, thank you for your generous comments. So first, I think what I got from the question is on the question of modernity, and I'm very agree that modernity is not a single unified concept, and what we see in the late 1930s across Southeast Asia, South and Southeast Asia, because you also mentioned Indian films. There were multiple locally articulated modernities shaped by different colonial regimes, media system, and also social formations. And my use of modernity here refers to I'm trying to portray as a historically specific condition with the urban growth, including the technology of sound film, the technology of radio, and also the expanding print culture and new forms of new kinds of new celebrity that mirroring the rise of the new urban middle classes in the urban areas. So um, so these conditions were, I think, shared structurally across port cities, which is interestingly located in two different colonial societies. But their cultural expressions, I think, is they were different. There was differentiation between those societies. And what we see in Terang Bulan in the film is what I want to uh, present is one regional articulation within that broader landscape of the region. And yeah, the comparison to Indian film, Indian cinema is very suggestive, and I would say I would very much agree that modernity is not always came from the West or transferred to the east or the north to the south, but also there's a south to south transfer of knowledge and technology that that I think in this case the resemblance between Rukia and the figures such as Nargis, it kind of invites comparative frames itself, and both I think operate within melodramatic traditions, both rely on songs or emotional expressions, and also perhaps uh, dancing choreography, and they both negotiate respectability and stardom, and how they negotiate the modernity itself. And I would be yeah I would be very uh, keen to pursue this kind of work in the future, but also at the same time I would be cautious about asserting direct influence without the materials that I have at the moment on the circulation of specific Indian films into, for example, into Batavia before the 1937. But however, Indian cinema was certainly present in Singapore and Malaya, and there were Indian exhibitors active in the region, and the visual and narrative parallels may perhaps reflect shared performance traditions and also musical structure, etc., that's circulating across the Indian Ocean. So I think this is more like uh, a new kind of region that have connective and comparative aspect of it. So and on technology, I agree with your emphasis that sound cinema itself was a new technological form, and what I see in the film uh, is an appropriation of sound film into existing performance economies, and the film integrates keroncong, bangsawan that I mentioned in the talk into a cinematic format. And yes, technology amplifies vernacular performance instead of replacing it. So what I also wanted to emphasize is the technology of camera itself. It's very embedded in the new aesthetic systems, and fashion. And on the other hand, when you mention where your mother came from in Tanzania, I think it's very opens an important comparative direction. In several African contexts, Indian films circulated widely and shaped fashion, music, and etc. And I think it's very important to look connectively and comparatively between East Africa and maritime Southeast Asia. That would be very productive in the future. And yes, the film poster. I'm a collector myself, so I'd love to look more actually on the posters and magazine that constructed what you mentioned on gender, how it constructed gender visually, and how the expression of femininity or masculinity differently framed. And yes, I haven't exposed to this kind of materials during the study, but I think it needs a, a different research altogether. So yes, thank you so much for. I hope it partly answer your comments and questions, and for Professor Kim, Amiel Kim, thank you. And that is an important question because music is also, as I mentioned, is very central to the film circulation and also in the film itself. So uh, uh, so from the materials that I use on the newspaper, the Malay newspaper in Batavia, Pemandangan. This tells us that at least one melody associated with the film was broadcast before or alongside cinema screening. But unfortunately, the press does not give us a full score or instrument list of instruments, and the film itself is unfortunately lost. And I haven't watched the film itself because yes, it's a lost film. And what I'm trying to do is to construct the narrative with the left evidence. And but the one one song title that is very interesting I found in the November 1957 article is the song Bunga Rus and Terang Bulan, which is the rose flower and the full moon. Sorry, Bunga Rus is it's a hybrid language. It's actually from Indonesian, the Malay, and the Dutch, which is pink flower, and full moon. So so what is it's a keroncong music. It's the structure of the lyrics itself is it's very much in convention with the keroncong, I believe, where with the romantic tone, with the romantic character, and I would say the I'm not that familiar with the musical tabulary, but um, I can play a bit of instrument. I can play guitar and and piano, and I think that it kind of resemble the keroncong tone with the tempo and etc. So what is also interesting is the 1930s. Keroncong was already a well-established urban popular form in Batavia and other port cities in both in Java or in Sumatra, and also reaching the Malay, some part of the Malay territory, British Malay territory. So you probably know better than I do. It used string-based instrument. As you mentioned, the mandolin, but also the violin, the flute, the bass, and with the Portuguese genealogy influenced by Portuguese by 1930s. I think it had long been localized and it was central to urban listening culture. And because keroncong was already circulated through radio and also another industry, which is gramophone, vinyl industry at that time, and theater troupe. It was familiar when audience watch Terang Bulan. They were not encountering an unfamiliar cinematic soundscape, but they were hearing a musical language that already associated with what they perceive in the decades or even centuries uh, before the cinema arrived, before the sound cinema arrived, and sound cinema amplified that kind of familiarity, and the technology of synchronized sound allowed keroncong to move from live performance spaces into reproducible film scenes. And I think that's what many of the people find it's very intriguing at that time. And also how it portray women, how keroncong portray women. Again, it's what I can tell is based from the synopsis and the lyrics, if it exists in the evidence in the materials that I use. But Rohaya desire from many film review is desire her her emotion through song, and it's a musical film, and so she does not declare some kind of emotion somehow in dialogue, but she responds musically in the film. So the song carries affection, it carries sorrow, but also it affirmed the paternal authority in the domestic space where she enforced to marry someone who is not is beyond her will. It's outside her will. I mean, so in the 1930s context, again, the female celebrity could easily attract moral suspicion, and keroncong provide a culturally legitimate emotional register. I think the comparison with the Philippines is maybe helpful because you mentioned many Filipino string-based hybrid genres similarly combine. I would say Spanish, Iberian instrumentation with kind of combination with local sensibilities, and I think across maritime Southeast Asia, string-based popular music became central to early sound cinema, and it's very cosmopolitan. I think it's a combination of not only Portuguese or Spanish, but also Chinese, Arabic, Indian, in the development of this new uh, uh, entertainment. So uh, I think keroncong makes Rohaya modern but at the same time legible through familiarity itself. Yeah. I hope it's also partly answer the question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Reza, for a detailed explanation regarding the comments and reaction from our reactor. It actually brings so much memories from childhood. Like the first Bollywood movie that I actually learned to love is Kya Ho Na Pyar Hai, which I learned to love when I was still in Mindanao before moving to Manila. And then it also brings so much of the studies that I've been researching as someone focusing on women. So it's fascinating that there are similarities of female representation in the context of Indonesia and the Philippines. In fact, in the Philippine context, we have Edna Duna, who played Jezebel, the first Jezebel in film cinema in the Philippines. And we have, I forgot the name, Rosa del Rosario, who played Darna. So Jezebel and Darna were actually a known figure in the Philippines. So Jezebel is a mermaid figure in the Philippines, and Darna is a heroine figure in the context of the Philippines, which leads me to my question: like, what's like the female representation in cinema during that time? Is it intentional, or was there a clamor? Or is it a process of time at the time? Like I was thinking about the target market at the time during the promotion or launching of these movies in the Malay world.
Well, thank you, Lulu. That's a very good question. It's very important. I think so. In terms of the language of the film itself, I think, and the evidence of the advertisement, it suggests that the film was aimed primarily at the Malay-speaking urban audience uh, across the Malay world, across the colonial Indonesia and also British Malaya. We can see this first in language, and the film promoted under a Malay title. The synopsis appeared in newspaper in Malay language. I mean, in Malay newspaper, it appears in Malay language, but in Dutch, it appears in Dutch, and also in English for audience in Singapore. But the that linguistic choice signals that Malay was the intended address for now. But on the exhibition context, the British in British Malay, the film screened in commercial cinema such as the Ritz, and these venues, or Alhambra in Singapore as well. And these venues serve mixed urban audience. There were Malay, Peranakan, or the mixed Malay and Chinese, also Indian, also Chinese viewer, depending on the program and the pricing tier. And it was not confined to elite European theaters, and the marketing language consistently emphasized it as a Malay musical, which suggests that the Malay-speaking viewers were the core audience. But interestingly, in one interview that I wrote in the article, is that the European um, uh, enterprises, especially cinema and companies or corporations, they they have the full control of the distribution of the film. So despite the fact that it's promoted as a Malay film, but the colonial power still dominates how the film distributed or circulated across the region. So again, there's a kind of uh, limitation of how this film circulate in terms of perhaps I would say in 1930s that there were also censorship that exists at that time, but also the the press framing in the colonial newspaper, they did not describe it as an art cinema or prestige colonial production, but they describe it as entertainment with emphasis on music and romance and performance tradition. And I think that kind of framing aligns with urban middle and lower middle class leisure culture in port cities, where they can um, access language literacy, where they were familiar uh, with the um, traditional performance, but most importantly, they have money to buy ticket to the cinema at that time, with a different pricing category at that time. Yeah, and so I would say that that the producers were thinking regionally, and the target was not a single colony; it was a dispersed Malay-speaking public, and so uh, it was difficult actually to see who were the exact audience at that time, but we can see from this materials that uh, at least they have capacity to spend money for watching film in cinema. They have the capacity to understand Malay, which is actually very common, and they also familiar with the tradition. So it's combination of urban middle and lower middle class at that time. That's what I could assume from the materials that I'm using.
So much, Reza, for that explanation and sharing that important information. So, do we have any from our audience who would like or wish to ask questions or share ideas regarding the topic that we have discussed this afternoon? Yeah, we have Dr. Rehan.
Just a quick one. Was there any form of censorship by the colonialists in terms of the movies that were generated, especially in terms of any politically aligned themes? I know we are digressing from the topic of gender and femininity, but I'm just curious because in the case of Indian movies that were taken out and everywhere, there's very high level of surveillance around politically inclined anti-colonial movies. So I don't know whether that happened also with the movies in the Malay region. Just a general question. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rahal. Yes, I think films were subject to review by colonial authorities before exhibition, because there's a colonial government body um, um, that deal with this kind of censorship. And but I would assume that the regulatory framework aimed to prevent material considered, well, aside politically subversive, but also morally improper or racially inflammatory. Because that was in colonial Indonesia. In British Malaya, they I think they have a more lenient approach towards this, especially in Penang, where it's known as a very cosmopolitan, where there was a thriving uh, print cultures. Newspaper were published in much more flexible terms compared to Singapore. Um, but in the case of Terang Bulan, with the materials that I have worked with, I don't see any indication of controversy or censorship intervention, and press coverage, both the Dutch sponsored and also the Colonial sponsored newspaper, also the local newspaper is overwhelmingly promotional somehow. And but as we can see from, I mean, in general, in 1930s is the period of in well 1920s is the decade before, it's the period of subversive, a lot of nationalist movements that come across Indonesia or in Malaya. But in 1930s, most of the elites, most of the political figures, they were in the um, in prison or in where they were expelled somewhere else, far from the central urban government. So I would say that 1930 is the period of stability somehow, and considered uh, peaceful and calm by the colonials, of course. And I think this kind of environment creates a new kind of entertainment, such as the film, could flourish and establish in in the context that is not uh, uh, subversive or politically in politically subversive or dangerous, considered dangerous to the colonials. So I think somehow it kind of answer why this genre of films genre that promote romance or individuals that involve in domestic space is actually more flourishing at that time, even after the in Indonesian cases, even after the fall of Sukarno and the period of decolonization, and after the rise of new order period of Suharto in Indonesia. I think that's what I can tell for this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Reza. I mean, Dr. Reza, for this wonderful discussion that you've shared. So, do we have any other questions from our audience? If not, I think we could have our conclusion, maybe a final message or anything that you would like to share as the speaker and as well from our reactors before we formally conclude this online event.
Well, I think yeah, I think it's very important to know. I mean, we Indonesia and Philippines are neighbors, and I think we spend too much time and energy looking for countries far away instead of try to understand our neighbors more. So I think it's better. It's great to have more conversation like this, and yeah, I think that's all I can say to see how the connective comparative aspect can bring a more comprehensive understanding of our past or our present as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Rehan?
Yeah, I'm just curious with Reza circulating name because Reza is a Persian name and he's Indonesian. I'm curious how he got the name Reza. Just a general closing remark. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, Professor Kapitan.
Yeah, thank you again, Dr. Reza and Lulu for organizing this. I guess as closing, especially for the undergraduate students who are here, it's very important that Dr. Reza pointed out how taste is kind of embodied in this cultural objects such as movies, and how movies, cinemas, and for example today our digital media shape how we experience culture, and that's very important, especially for it's a say a very important takeaway, especially for undergraduate students who's studying culture and society. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for our two reactors and to our guest speakers. So before I formally award the certificates, I just like to share a few backgrounds as a one-man team, always organizing an online lecture series like this. So I'd like to share my deepest appreciation to few people who are not so tired in helping me organize in this kind of event. The first one is our college secretary, Mary Grace Tyros. Thank you so much to our in-house graphic artist, Miss Leraline Baez, who I always disturb and annoy every time I ask her to make a poster. And to our multimedia, to our marketing manager, Miss Nali Pangan, for always being so supportive, and to our Dean of School of Arts and Sciences, Dean Shirley Padua, for always being supportive. So our meetup with Dr. Reza was just accidental because I got in the wrong room. So I needed to pretend that I was in the right room. So I could just keep asking questions because the topic that he was discussing was similar to my hometown in Zamboanga, where there are because he was talking about Sarina Mall. So there are some malls that are actually owned by our local government, and we called it bazaar. So I resonated and I got related to that. So instead of getting humiliation for getting into the wrong room in Chiang Mai, I just pretended that I was in the right room. So that's how I was able to get into the room. So if it's a divine intervention or an organic encounter, it's actually a wonderful academic blessing um, um, to have him here in our. I was actually hesitant to invite him because I'm not sure if he knows our school. But just to tell everyone, our school is the first Asian school established by the Asian for the Asian to actually educate for women. So there is an historical explanation of our school. So it's very important in the Philippine culture and heritage. So yeah, so thank you so much for the people also who have here watching, and most especially to our guest speaker. Thank you so much, Reza, Dr. Reza, for gracing. I think this is his first time in Philippine academic community. Am I right? Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So to award the certificate, let me just share my slide. So I hope you can see my slide. Oh.
That's me.
That's Dr.
Wait. Let me just try to navigate this. Wait. Okay. Anyway, I
Me
cannot.
again.
That's Dr.
Me again.
Wait. Just give me a few seconds. Okay, I think I'm ready this time. So, allow me to award the certificate of appreciation and my deepest appreciation to our guest speaker who is first time in Philippine academic community. So, for for his valuable contribution as a guest speaker for this online workshop held at February 23, 2026 via Zoom with the lecture that we actually had this afternoon with the title Cinema, Stardom, and Modern Womanhood, Popular Culture, and Vernacular Modernity in the Late Colonial Malay World, signed by the Dean of School of Arts and Sciences, Dean Shirley Padua. So thank you so much, Dr. Teuku, Reza, Fadeli. So yeah, so the
Thank you.
next one is for our two reactors. So we also wanted to award our deepest appreciation and this certificate for Dr. Satwinder Rehal of the School of Arts and Sciences, and another certificate of appreciation for Professor Amiel Kim Kapitan of School of Music. Thank you so much to our audience, to our guest speaker for being with us. So before we formally end this talk, I hope we could have at least a group photo. Professor Kapitan, can you take a
Okay.
screenshot? Yeah, for a better screenshot. So if you wanted to join, please open your camera. To our Indonesian friends who participated in this event, thank you so much. It means a lot for emerging scholars, struggling scholars like us who wanted to put an identity in the scholastic community. Maraming maraming salamat. Terima kasih for Indonesian. Magsukol in my own dialect from Mindanao. So, and gracias con todos in Chabacano. So those are the languages I learned growing up in Mindanao. So thank you so much. So we'll have a group photo.
Can you please open your cameras? Thank you. For those who can, please. Thank you. All right. We are waiting. Okay.
I think they're shy.
Okay, anyway, maybe I can start now. Ready. Wait. 1, 2, 3. One more. Lulu, your
Wait,
camera. Yeah, one more.
wait. Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Every time there's an
One.
important event, my camera is not working.
All right. 1, 2, 3. One more time, Lulu, your camera is always closing.
Okay.
One, two, three. All right. Thank you. Terima
Thank you
kasih.
so much. I hope we could have next collaboration with our Indonesian friends and friends
Terima kasih.
across Southeast
Marining,
Asia.
marining, salamat.
Maraming salamat.
Bagus, bagus.
Bagus.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Lulu,
Yeah.
especially.
Thank you. Yeah.
I will leave the
Yeah. Yeah.
meeting.
Fine.
Thank you.